Dr. Kreef, what is marriage? Is there a truth about marriage?
We were talking about translations and mistranslations.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people say that gay marriage and gay relations are just mistranslations of the verses, like Romans, the ones in the Old Testament.
Yeah, so the accusation is usually that the word homosexuality it gets incorporated into the Bible in like the modern era.
One of the commonest complaints about Catholicism is that it's the religion of no, especially in the area of sexuality.
Welcome back, everyone. As the intro hinted, we'll be exploring some important voices and ideas in this video. I've been thinking carefully recently about how to approach the topic of gay marriage from a different angle. So I have a number of clips here, and we're going to develop an argument to provide a nuanced perspective on this issue. So this first clip offers a unique twist on how the traditional Christian view is being challenged on gay marriage. Christians are capitulating to culture. So pay close attention to this question from this non-Christian to this Bible scholar, and then we will go from there.
We were talking about translations and mistranslations.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people say that gay marriage and gay relations are just mistranslations of the verses, like Romans, the ones in the Old Testament. Do you think they're mistranslations and the Bible is saying that they don't ever just talk about gay marriage or gay relations in general? Or do you think that there are mistranslations?
So pay close attention to what he is saying. He's likely been told by people claiming to be Bible-believing Christians that homosexuality is a mistranslation of the Greek, and therefore the Bible doesn't actually condemn homosexual behavior. This argument, though false, is being spread by Christians themselves, not just outsiders. And I think we need to see how big of an issue this is. This is a very serious problem. Notice this Bible scholar's response.
Yeah, so the accusation is usually that the word homosexuality it gets incorporated into the Bible in like the modern era. So the words in Hebrew in the Old Testament Leviticus, Paul, particularly in 1 Corinthians 7, plays off of what the Greek translation of the Old Testament has and uses this word arsenokoites, which literally means to lie down a man with a man. And so I think it's not a mistranslation because the concept is there. Like what it's talking about is not obscure. It might be controversial, but it's not obscure in the Hebrew and Greek. The accusation is usually that it's not talking about like same-sex sex. It's talking about something like men sleeping with boys or temple prostitution.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really rationalize that. There's a guy named Robert Gagnon. That's your last name.
Yeah.
Robert Gagnon. Except do you say Gagnon?
Yeah, these people don't understand.
Wait, hold on. Is this guy about to justify homosexuality?
No. So Robert Gagnon is a scholar. He did his dissertation. He taught at Princeton for a while on this, like the linguistic and cultural context of homosexuality in the Bible. So his is kind of like the volume. So he goes through all this stuff.
Why are you laughing at that?
And talks about.
Because Mark comes from a long line of people.
You gotta write it.
Long line of croissants. We just call them croissants.
Yeah, you just call them croissants.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a croissant historian, and then what did he find out?
It's just because the word homosexuality exists now in English doesn't mean that the concept isn't there
Back in the day.
within the Bible, yeah.
So the Bible scholar offers a nuanced argument here, suggesting the Greek term doesn't refer strictly to same-sex activity, but to abnormal practices like pederasty or temple prostitution. Still, this reflects a broader trend, using the Bible to justify our culture's sexual revolution instead of letting the scriptures shape our ethics. While the term may not translate verbatim in the Greek as homosexuality, the concept is clearly implicit in both Greek and Hebrew. As the scholar puts it, the Bible is not obscure on this issue. Therefore, it does in fact condone homosexuality. But again, notice the startling trend. Many are turning to the Bible not to understand it, but to find approval for their views. These aren't irreverent skeptics, and that's important to see here. They've been told by liberal Christians that traditional Christians have misunderstood what the Bible is ultimately and really saying. It seems we're caught in a deep word game about he and being really a she, and even about what Scripture actually means.
Dr. Kreef, what is truth?
Oh, that's an easy one. That's one of the easiest questions in the world to answer. Everybody knows what truth is. Truth is telling it like it is. Truth is your words and thoughts corresponding to reality.
What is marriage? Is there a truth about marriage?
There's two philosophies of marriage. The traditional one, which exists in almost every pre-modern society, is that marriage is something natural. It's a given. It's not an invention like baseball that you could redesign or undesign. It's like an elephant. You can choose to get on its back if you want, or you can choose to get out of its way if you want, but you can't change the elephant. You can't turn it into a horse.
Yeah.
That's the traditional, not just Catholic, but pretty universal notion of marriage. The new one in our civilization is marriage is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
If you want to marry your same-sex lover, next step, if you want to marry your dog. There was a woman in Canada who sued to marry herself. They didn't hear the case. They had no reason for saying, no, you can't, so they didn't hear it.
There's a woman a couple of years ago who married her dolphin in Israel. Mm-hmm. And they interviewed her after why, and they said, afterwards, and said, how could you do that? And why would you do that? She goes, because this is the love of my life. Mm-hmm. And I have a relationship with this dolphin, and so I should be able to marry this dolphin and have it recognized.
Yeah.
So it gets to that point of absurdity. Now, let's go back to...
That's because we define love and therefore marriage in terms of feeling. If you read the saints, you get shocked by the fact that they all discount feeling. It doesn't matter whether you feel holy, just be holy. It doesn't matter whether you feel holy, just be holy.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether God gives you those fine feelings, which are good. The will has to be toughened up.
Yeah.
Truth corresponds to reality, and reality is more important than our feelings. It seems because we prefer our feelings to reality, we try to reinterpret reality into absurdity. Of course, that only makes us feel worse. To close, let us reflect on the musings of Bishop Barron.
One of the commonest complaints about Catholicism is that it's the religion of no, especially in the area of sexuality. It appears as though when the rest of the culture is moving in a much more progressive direction in that regard, the church seems to be kind of a crabbed, old-fashioned, puritanical, finger-wagging no religion. Well, I first want to make a distinction between two types of no. There's no pure and simple, by which I mean a no to something positive. Think of someone who's jealous and someone's success appears to them and they say no to it. They simply try to undermine it. Or think of a racist who sees the object of his irrational hatred and he says no to him and tries to undermine him. Well, those are just negations, pure and simple. But there's another kind of no, which you might say is a no to a no. Something negative's going on and you say no to it. In fact, you're in service of a higher yes. Think of it as a no to a no, which is sort of a double negative. It constitutes actually a great yes. An example of this, any golf coach worth his salt will say no far more often than he says yes. That's because there are 1,000 ways to swing the golf club improperly. So you say no to all of those, but it's in service of the great yes, which is the right way to swing the golf club. Well, can I suggest that the church's no in regard to sexuality is a no of the second type. It's not a Puritanism. It's not a negation of the body or pleasure or sexuality. It's a no to a no. It's a no to a distortion of what sexuality ought to be. Now, what is the great yes? What is the church's view of what sex ought to be? Well, can I suggest looking at a perhaps surprising place, namely Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12. And we find this line, which is fascinating. Paul says, I urge you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, your spiritual worship. Now here's Paul talking to a first century audience that was well aware of this practice of sacrifice. What would an ancient Israelite do? Well, he'd bring to the temple in Jerusalem an unblemished animal, lamb or a sheep or a bull or something. And he would sacrifice the animal to Yahweh as a sign of forgiveness, of reparation, or of communion, or of thanksgiving. What was he doing? He was aligning himself thereby to God. He was bringing his mind, his will, his whole person onto line with Yahweh. No ancient Israelite ever thought for a second that God needed these sacrifices. Think of some of the pagan gods and goddesses who seem to need our worship. That's not true in the Bible. But the ancient Israelite knew he needed sacrifice because in the very act of sacrifice, he was becoming conformed unto God. Okay, so Paul says, I urge you to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. To construe your whole life as an offering by which you become conformed to God. That's what he means. Now, take one more step. Who is this God that Paul is urging the Romans here to sacrifice to? It's the God who's disclosed in Jesus Christ as love. Look in 1 John, and we find that famous line, God is love. Therefore, when we live in God, we live in love. Right? Now, put the logic together. To sacrifice the whole of yourself to God is to become conformed to God. But God is love. Therefore, to sacrifice the whole of your life, and that means mind, will, passions, emotions, body, sexuality. That means everything in you is being transformed into love. Okay, what's the church's teaching on sexuality? That your sexuality is meant to become love. It's meant to become a vehicle of love. It's meant to be conformed unto love. And when it slides off of that conformity, that's when the church says no. When it becomes what it's not supposed to be, then the church says no to that no. It's in service of the great yes.
Christianity says no to homosexuality, not out of hatred, but because it ultimately leads to disintegration of the self in society. It may feel like love or fulfillment, but it pulls a person away from the divine source of true love. And there is nothing more tragic than separation from God. That's why warning against such behavior is actually an act of love. The path forward is sacrifice, as Bishop Barron is saying here. When any disordered desire arises in any of us, whether homosexual or other types of sexual deviation, we are called to lay it down. Sacrifice is the gateway to sanctity, and sanctity leads to love. What your heart longs for is love, but you're seeking it apart from God when you're trying to fulfill sexual deviations and homosexual behaviors. These paths will never satisfy. Only by offering yourself fully to God can you become the person of love you were made to be and to find the desire and rest that you so desperately desire. All right, that's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. Remember that Christianity is Christ, and without Christ, there is no Christianity. See you in the next one. Peace.